And I'd like to thank the county leaders for joining us today and dedicating your attention for a twofer today. Today, of course, we have this special presentation this morning at 10, and then at 12:30, again, the county leaders will meet again as part of its regular county leaders series. And today's guest is Senator Gillibrand. Really appreciate everyone participating and dedicating these portions of your day to be with us. We try to bring things to your attention that are worthy of your time. Back in June of 2020, the governor, of course, issued Executive Order 203. This order requiring the local governments to enact a law enforcement reform collaborative and requiring the local governments to submit this to the state division of the budget, I believe, by April 1st. When that executive order was put in place, there really was no legal teeth to that. It was more of a guidance or a directive. But since then, in January, the governor has included language in the budget that would intercept and withhold any state aid owing or flowing to the local governments if they have not submitted a plan and conform to the requirements of Executive Order 203. And if they do not do that, the language also includes, the pending language also enables the Attorney General to put in place a monitor in the police department, and the local government would need to pay for that monitor. So that is some policy that has been put into the budget division, into the budget by the budget division, and that's pending before the state legislature. I'd also like to thank the sheriffs that are with us here today, and thank the sheriffs for all that they do to protect our community and keep us safe, and for their input and guidance and true collaboration with the county leaders in all the counties around the state. Really appreciate their ongoing assistance and support. Today, as Ryan mentioned, we have the Director of Legislative Affairs and Policy for Governor Andrew Cuomo, Chatodd Floyd. It's hard for me to take him serious at the state because I'm so used to working with him at the city of New York. But now he's changed hats and he is working for our governor, and he has been tasked with making sure that we have all the tools that we need to properly implement this reform collaborative package. We're very pleased that Chatodd reached out to us. I'm very pleased that he's here. He is going to be able to take some questions for you. If he doesn't have the answers, he'll certainly get back to you. He's going to run through a quick presentation here today. Make sure folks know the requirements, the suggestions. NISAC will also issue an action alert later today to put out a lot of these plans, details, suggestions, things that we have been monitoring and collecting on your behalf. We'll also include a version of this webinar today, as well as some other information. And thank you, Ryan, for putting all that together for later today. Okay, Chatodd, let's go to you. Appreciate your outreach and friendship and support over the years.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Steve. And just want to thank everybody for being able to join in today. As Steve mentioned, you know, what we want to do here for the governor's office is make sure that we're providing information to our municipalities as well as our law enforcement officers to ensure that they are able to comply with our executive order. And particularly in light of the budget proposal, we just want to make sure that everyone is aware of all the steps that they need to take, be a resource to you all. So that way there's no monitor imposed, and ideally also that if your proposals are able to get across the line by April 1st, we don't have to make any sort of monetary penalty with respect to funds as well. So I'm just gonna go over real quick the sort of impetus behind this, and then also some of the projected timelines and potential partnerships and do QA. So with that said, just gonna share my screen real quick. Okay. Okay. Is everybody sees the PowerPoint there?
Yes, we do, Chatodd.
Cool. All right. So, you know, when we began this summer here, we were rocked by the tragic killing of George Floyd. And we saw that, obviously social change comes from communication of the fact and a plan for it, motivated, and as well as a motivated citizenry. Um, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of protests in the wake of this killing, not just here in New York, but across this country and across this globe. And obviously, as Steve mentioned, and a major thanks to the sheriffs, we recognize the critical role that law enforcement officers do day in and day out to protect us. And that the only way we can sort of move forward from this current position is a recognition, honest dialogue in between the community and law enforcement, and really sort of working to repair police and community relations. As noted, despite all of the amazing, tremendous work that law enforcement do on a day-to-day basis, there are a few individuals, high-profile events that has sort of rocked our foundation and core as a society, that has sort of caused unnecessary tension. And we recognize that while they are few and far between amongst law enforcement, there's a lot of systemic behavior that can be addressed through obviously those community conversations. We want to make sure that you all are continuing to engage. I think one of the things that we have noticed in this whole process is that society has to be aware that we're committed and that we want to change as well. And that all of our law enforcement stands behind making sure that abuses are able to stop, and that we can get through all of this together. So at the beginning of June, when the governor came out with this, we had did the 4 cornerstones of the Say Their Name package, which was the transparency of prior disciplinary records through 50A, a chokehold ban, a proposal designed to limit false race-based 9/11 reporting, and also that the Attorney General can serve as an independent prosecutor for police-involved shootings. Stopping police abuse is obviously something that we want to just make sure that all New Yorkers know that is not going to be tolerated here in our state. And we know that obviously you're doing amazing work. So by doing this project, we're going to restore confidence in the public, respect for law enforcement, as well as trust within our communities, and heal the community relations. I'm just going to skip forward here. So this first question here, for what function should the police reform? In our proposal, in the EO, we provide a range of different solutions and suggestions. We have research. This is intended to be guidance and not necessarily a particular requirement for any of our law enforcement officers. We want to make sure that we can begin with evaluating the duties and functions of the police. And I think that if we were to take a true and honest assessment, law enforcement over the years has actually been responsive to a range of different roles that did not exist within their purview 10, 15, or 20 years ago, particularly in light of all of the mental health screenings and things of that nature that have occurred, and increased visibility on mental illness as a disease and treatment. So one of the questions that we posed was whether or not law enforcement should respond to mental health calls. Locally in Albany, I know that their package has already considered adopting the CAHOOTS model, which is based out of Oregon and allows for a partnership in between nurses and/or an EMT, as well as a social worker, to be able to address those sort of non-emergency calls. Just because what we've noticed is that when law enforcement responds to disturbed individuals, it can sort of escalate that tension, and we want to be able to promote de-escalation to the greatest extent possible. But once again, obviously every community is different, and this is just one of those ideas to push us forward. We will also want to have folks question what are the effective policing standards and practices. as well as does your department consider officers' past use of force during any of their sort of annual performance reviews? I think trying to figure out and identify behaviors and patterns within officers to ensure that we're able to stop any sort of directly incredibly controversial conduct from occurring would make everyone's lives easier and also not only promote trust and safety um, for that particular officer, but overall in law enforcement. I think when we see a lot of the abuse or murders, unfortunately, many of those officers already had prior conduct that should have been considered as a possible red flag. And so one of those suggestions is whether or not you should evaluate past use of force. Does your office have or department have a transparent process for investigating misconduct is another essential question that we want all of our law enforcement and municipalities to consider. What policing activity data should be collected? At the beginning of this process, we had asked for all of our law enforcement and municipalities to be able to publicly provide data posted on their website, so that way the public can see and inspect, and those can hopefully facilitate the dialogue and community conversations that should be taking place. And obviously, to the extent that it's available, any demographic information that you have that could point to any sort of other targeting concerns and other issues that many members, particularly Black and Latino citizens, may feel discriminated against and or harassed just in their daily lives. Where we recommend is for the task force and our working groups that you all stand up, involves the leadership of the local police, obviously members of the community, interested nonprofit and community groups, local district attorneys' offices, local public defenders, as well as local elected officials. We do not require any specific party to join in, as we understand that every community is different, but we do feel as though these groups would go a long way in terms of actually promoting real transparency and real honest dialogue. I know that in some instances, advocate groups have regularly reached out to us for some counties, expressing concern that they feel like they're shut out. I think one of the easier solutions to doing this is if you all are having community conversations sort of outside of a completely public forum for the duration, is to at least make sure that the public is aware of who you all are meeting with and sort of being able to provide some sort of sense of guidance in terms of how those conversations are taking place. All offices aren't the same. Some of them post very detailed minutes of every single conversation they're having. And some municipalities, it's a little lacking on the details. I just think it will go a long way towards like really promoting transparency, just providing any sort of outline that you all may have. So this here is the suggested work plan. As we mentioned, the planning process was for August through September. The listening sessions and learning from the community was supposed to take place from about mid-September through early November. And then in counties, localities were supposed to draft their initial proposals through November through December. And right about now, it should be about the public comment period. Now, this is just a suggested work plan. We know some counties are far ahead. We also know that there are some counties and law enforcement offices who are behind schedule. But the important goal here for us is making sure that we're able to ratify any of the work plans and proposals by April 1st. That April 1st deadline, so as soon as we're wrapping up the state budget, we should know, and we should have the certifications from all of the respective over 400 law enforcement offices throughout our state. But that should be ratified and sent to us for approval by April 1. And community engagement can obviously occur sort of throughout various portions of this proposal and project. Now, in the executive budget proposal, as was mentioned, sorry about that. So this year, the governor's Article 7 language, it's Part L of the Public Protection and General Government bill, It authorized New York State Attorney General to install a monitor to oversee the operation of police agencies for all local governments that fail to certify by April 1st of 2021 until the certification is filed. The monitor would be paid for at the expense of that police agency or local government and would be in addition to any withholding of state funds determined by the Division of Budget. We want to do everything possible to make sure that you all do not have those funds withheld, and obviously that we are not placing monitors on all of our law enforcement officers. We think that we can be able to do this well, and as change comes when times are right. And this is a great moment of change for our society and for the state of New York. So with that said, I just want to turn it over for any questions that folks may have for nice Q&A dialogue.
Thank you, Chatodd. We do have a few questions in the chat room right now in the chat feature. If you have questions, I'll remind all the leaders and sheriffs and staff on the call today, please submit them in the chat box. And after we finish up the questions that are in the chat box, we'll open it up in case others have any verbal remarks to provide. But the first question, Chatodd, is, will there be any consideration given to an extension of the April 1st date without penalty should a municipality run up against the deadline?
Is this with respect to if there's a situation? Hold on a second. Let me stop shared screen. I guess my question would be, is the concern that they're unable to ratify just because of local politics of like either the county legislature or their local city council? Is that what the hiccup is on meeting the timeline? I think we could have a conversation sort of around those specific details, more so than, you know, if a county just failing to report any information about what's going on.
Okay, thank you for that.
And I would say that would probably be more of a case-by-case basis. You know, if you chose to submit it 1 week before the April 1st deadline versus if you started this process well in advance and your legislature body wasn't able to move the proposal forward, we can have conversations.
Okay, great. The next question here, for small rural counties that do not have a road patrol, but do have a few positions with police powers in the sheriff's and DA's offices, is the process the same as those that have an active road patrol to complete the plan?
So, yeah, so all law enforcement offices have to do this. We understand that there are obviously a ton of small villages in town, like police forces, that the utility of doing this proposal for offices that may have 4 or 10 law enforcement officials may be a little bit harder and challenging. What we actually have allowed is for those small villages and towns to actually be able to partner in with their respective counties. So multiple offices are able to partner together, particularly if they're closely related from a geographic standpoint, and convene one group rather than every individual village having to have their own. And when they do so, when they send their certification, they should let us know who they partnered with, and we should all receive that package and information together.
Okay. Follow-up question, Chatodd, on that is, how does a county certify? How do they submit a plan to New York State? Is there an email address?
Yeah, so actually I'll have to go back and pull up the link, but I can follow up with you all via email. So when we first released this package, we had an entire guidance book. That guidance book at the end actually has a form that the counties actually have to fill out, and they can use that for the submission. And it has all of the submission details in there.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll send it out to you all.
Great. We'll include that information with the action alert that Stephen mentioned this afternoon for everyone. The next question here comes from the Southern Tier region. And it says that I'm concerned with the lack of recognition on the governor's behalf of the 150 plus law enforcement agencies that have established New York State accreditation status. These agencies should be held as an example of what is right about law enforcement in New York State. It's a New York State accreditation program, and these agencies have spent valuable resources to achieve and maintain state accreditation. Many of the suggestions in the resource guide issued in August 2020 are already in place in the agencies who have that accreditation status. And I guess that's more or less a comment, but a question on top of that that I would have is whether or not an accredited law enforcement agency, if they could submit their current accreditation plan and how they're meeting those requirements already, Chatodd, or do they need to go above and beyond and formalize this plan in addition to that accreditation status?
So they do need to go above and beyond. Obviously, we understand that all law enforcement officers are not situated in the same place. We have tremendous respect for all of our law enforcement officials who have already been accredited. We would like to see even more law enforcement officers become accredited in the coming years. We didn't make a requirement that every office is accredited, receives accreditation. We did include proposals to ensure that we are able to sort of move forward with our law enforcement officers. And we want to start thinking in the long term about trying to incentivize more officers to become accredited because we understand its value. What we have in our package and whether officers that are unaccredited could rise up and become accredited would be tremendous. And we think that that step may actually be a lot of critical reforms that are necessary and what we're seeking to hear from you all. But I think one of the most pivotal pieces here is community conversation. A lot of amazing work happens in behind closed doors, which is good. But I think that until we're able to sit down and hear from our respective communities about, whether or not your citizenry feels the same way about the reform steps is an important factor in being able to move forward together as a society. And in having that dialogue, some of it could even be misinformation. So sometimes the community may not be aware of all the amazing work that you're doing day in, day out to actually reform yourselves. Because we know there are obviously plenty of offices that have been making reforms throughout this period, well in advance of George Floyd, and have been making those commitments for the past few decades. And that is successful, and that's amazing to hear. But unfortunately, we really need to promote community dialogue and greater transparency. So we would still require them to certify. I think that they can obviously make a good case for presenting that information to their community. Maybe there's some things that could be fine-tuned. There can be there's other low barriers, such as like creating public information officers and other sort of things that can be done just to sort of continue that dialogue and advance the proposals. We don't delineate or require a ton of specific requirements in our framework. And so I just would request that everyone go back and look at our workbook, the Reimagine Plan, and they will have everything that they need to be able to prepare for certification.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chatodd. The next question here is, will the state provide any funding or assistance for proposals to be implemented after the plans have been sent to the state? So I guess in order to do implementation, the counties are wondering, will there be some state resources to assist with modernizing and making these changes?
As far as this budget is concerned, we do not currently anticipate providing any funding. And I would also caveat and state that we don't require specific proposals in our plan. So some counties have chosen to make body cameras a direct requirement, or the dash cams a direct requirement. Those are local decisions. So if your locality chooses to do that, we are greatly appreciative, but we do not have any sort of money lined out for that particular endeavor at this point in time.
Okay. This is a technical question here. Assistance from the state DCJS to have a universal records management system for all law enforcement agencies to collect consistent and uniform data would help greatly. Is that a possibility rather than several different systems to merge data?
Um, I am happy to have a follow-up conversation with DCJS about that. I understand that obviously every office is not going to have the same level of sophistication, and that could be a bit of an operational challenge. We're happy to have continued dialogue on that topic. So I'll reach back out to the DCJS team. I don't think that that's going to be something that's going to happen overnight, but we can definitely sort of take that information back and explore it further.
All right, great. So for everyone on the call, that concludes the chat questions at this time. Does anyone have a follow-up question that they would like to ask Chatodd? If you do so, please feel free to unmute your line. But before we do that, I want to go back to Stephen Aquario.
Hold on,
Yep.
Ryan. Thank you. Yeah, we did have one question additional come in, Chatodd, about the state police. Is the state police submitting a plan by April 1st as well? And can that plan be shared with us? Any preliminary plans be shared with us so that we could circulate that amongst the counties for additional guidance?
Okay. I will need to check back in with the state police in regards to any specific proposals or changes or modifications that they may be exploring.
Okay.
I would say that if folks are looking for templates, we have received obviously a couple of different local authorities who have either gave us their proposals in advance for exploration, just to sort of see if they were on the right track. And we sort of provided feedback, once that proposal was at least already available for public comment, just to sort of make sure that things were okay. And we've been able to provide that sort of guidance. So if any locality is looking for particular examples, I can absolutely share a couple of them. Some that are already completed their entire process, others that are still in the public comment window, but have been coordinating with us and having ongoing dialogue.
Okay, so Ryan, before we go out for some additional questions, just want to give the leaders and the sheriffs on January 23rd at 2 p.m. or NISAC is going to host a workshop as part of its legislative conference on this subject, January 23rd at 2. We hope to have the city of New York participating on that panel and also present some of the examples that we can get from Chatodd that have already been submitted, as well as some other ones. And then again, on February 9th and February 18th, we'll put some information out from Albany Law School, who will be conducting some roundtables and share with folks around the state examples that they have been working on and collecting as well. Ryan, it looks like we have a few more questions that have come in.
Yes, here's a question, Chatodd. Are any changes to state law regarding policing being planned? Many reform issues, pretextual stops, etc., are handled at the state level and are out of the hands of cities and counties.
As far as the executive budget proposal, we don't have anything in regards to pretextual stops. Obviously, this is sort of also within the domain of the state legislature. I think that we didn't want, in this process, we were sort of deferring to counties on what they want to do. I don't believe that there's any restrictions on localities if they wanted to sort of ban that in and of itself on their own accord. They're welcome to do so. I don't think that there's any sort of requirement in state law, to my knowledge, that sort of requires you to do that. So if you would like to do that, to take on that challenge, we would not stand in your way.
All right, and Chatodd, there appears, just following up on Stephen's earlier question that I missed on state police, there's a couple additional comments that I want to share. There's a question in here as to why EO 203 doesn't specifically include New York State Police. And then there's another comment from another county that says the state police are the largest law enforcement footprint in a lot of the rural counties. SUNY police, MTA police are not included in this reform process. Why not? Why isn't the state police involved? And then there's another comment here that says that in our county, we've invited state police to all of our public meetings, and they have declined, stating that those decisions are above the captain's pay grade. So I wanted to just to share those comments with you. And Stephen, I'll head back to you in case there's other questions here that you've received on your end. But if anyone has an additional comment or question, please feel free to do so. Please feel free to ask your question.
So in response to the state police, I think their role is inherently different in the sense that the state police don't have a particular local community, even though there's obviously a presence, particularly in the rural districts on roadways. But we can't create a specific policy for each individual locality that the state police operates in. That said, obviously, we want to make sure that we're working with the state police to obviously be committed to any sort of reforms, and we can circle back on with that as an issue. And I can certainly take that feedback from the counties that they want to make sure that our state police are committed to the same levels of reforms that we're imposing on, obviously, our localities.
Terrific, Chatodd. So here's another one that really connects to that response that you just gave. Many counties, or most counties, have a closest car response policy with the state police. And to not have the state police involved causes inconsistencies and confusion for the constituents regarding response expectations and resolve. So just wanted to get that on your radar as to why these questions are coming up. There is a strong connection and need for working together in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that can actually happen with that is when the localities are convening their bodies, and obviously some of the members of the state police are actually hearing that feedback. When we're submitting their proposals, I think that we can sort of look and see how our officers are working within those particular regions and making sure that we are working to be as consistent with what the community wants. And so we can sort of have that as a continued point of dialogue, because I do understand, obviously that coordination effort is real. And if the locality wants something to occur, I think that we need to sort of consider having those conversations back within the state about how we can best manage given that sort of natural partnership.
Chatodd, another question coming in. Are SUNY peace and police officers required in the community colleges, of course, part of the SUNY system, to submit a plan, and also the MTA police?
Okay. So I will have to go back to my tracker off top on the SUNY police of whether or not they were one of the ones who were already mentioned. They may have been. With respect to the MTA, I can check as well, but obviously a lot of the MTA training and things of that nature, particularly in New York City, comes from NYPD primarily. So obviously NYPD is sort of rooted in a lot of the work and has been having ongoing conversations. And I see that we have some representatives from New York City on today.
Chatodd, another question here about civil service. Can we flag civil service rules for you to look at and engage the Department of Civil Service if law enforcement, county sheriffs have tried to attempt to recruit or mirror the community demographics, which is always a good thing to do, especially to have folks who live in that community be part of the law enforcement agency? There might need to be some civil service change. So we wanted to flag that for you as we go through the process.
Okay. I think that we're always open to hearing various proposals. And I know that there are some localities that have mentioned possibly partnering with SUNY in order to provide test preparation and skills in order to make sure that they're able to increase their diversity pipeline. So, I would be open to sort of exploring that moving forward. I think it is a lot easier for us to think about ways to do test preparation and skills building to make sure that we're able to recruit a more diverse pipeline. And, that can be through advertising and outreach within those particular neighborhoods. We just know, obviously, given a wide range of disparities, that some folks may struggle on the civil service exam. So assistance that could be provided in that effort in the interim of making legislative change should be explored first.
Ryan?
Okay, and it looks like Sheriff Hood in Madison County, do you have a question for Chatodd?
Yeah, hey, thanks for giving me a second. I wanted to say, Chatodd, thank you guys very much for having this meeting. I wish it would have happened a lot earlier. We've been kind of going through this package. You know, we got it. We didn't hear much about the package when we got it, so we were kind of took it on our own with the counties. But I'm one of 59 elected sheriffs in the state, and we would love to have dialogue with Albany. We do not have it. You know, I commend you for today for doing this. This is great. But with the bail reform package and all of the changes that you're making, nobody ever comes and talks to us. In Albany, we have 2 conferences a year, and all the sheriffs get together, and none of this stuff is ever brought to our attention. And I was just at a meeting up in Lake George a few months ago with all the chiefs of police in the state and all the sheriffs in the state, and none of us are brought into the conversation with things that are directly related to law enforcement. And I think it would help you guys out a lot to hear from the people. You know, most of us are 30-year officers in law enforcement, so you're getting up into thousands of years of experience. But we'd like to be included in the conversation. I think we have a lot to add as sheriffs who are elected by the people of the county. So we, unlike police chiefs, are representatives of the people of all of our counties. And I think it would be good for you guys moving forward if you started a dialogue with us so we could kind of give some input. And I think we'd have a really good result product in the end where, you know, everyone's represented. And I think we could do even more than we're doing now. So thank you, Chatodd.
Thank you. And yes, we can kind of continue the dialogue. I just shot you over my information, and obviously at the conclusion of this chat, I think you know, anyone can sort of have access to my info. We definitely want to be able to work together as much as possible. And as I mentioned, you know, I'm pleased to hear that you're already doing the work and you got to it and are facilitating the dialogue. Let me know if you're running into challenges, because we do want to be a resource. Like, we're not trying to just come in and take funds and impose monitors on anyone. We want to be able to make sure that our county sheriffs and other localities are successful in this endeavor.
Yeah, I think it'll improve if we all get on the same page together, so our voices are heard too. Because I think you're missing out right now the way it's done with a lot of our input. So thanks again. I appreciate it, Chatodd.
Okay.
All right, Chatodd, just one last follow-up question for everyone. We've gotten a lot of questions, whether or not your slide presentation will be available. Is that something we can share in addition to the recording of today's webinar?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great. So Stephen, back to you. That concludes all the questions we've received at this time.
Okay, thank you, Chatodd Floyd from the Office of Governor Cuomo. Really appreciate your outreach to us on this topic, your friendship and ongoing assistance. And I really appreciate Sheriff Hood mentioning that from Madison County. I'd like to echo those comments as well, that we really appreciate working together and collaborating with the governor on policy, public policy. And we have a voice, and we would like to share our voice with you and collaborate together. And so your participation here today demonstrates that, Chatodd, and I'm very grateful that you reached out to us. And we will be working together with you over the next several months on this issue and other issues that come up. And Chatodd is always available for all of you around the state and accessible, and he'll get back to you on your questions. So again, January 23rd, 2 p.m., February 9th, February 18th, we're going to be hosting some roundtables on this subject. We're going to put an action alert out later this afternoon. If you please just keep an eye on your email, we'll put this recording out there. And again, I want to thank all the leaders for what you're doing in our communities to reform law enforcement practices, and also for joining us on the county leaders meetings. Ryan, to conclude, thank you.
Just one last comment for the sheriffs and law enforcement agencies who are on today's call. We'll share that action alert with the Sheriff's Association so they can get that out to you as well.
Okay, this will conclude today's presentation. Again, thank you to Chatodd Floyd.
Thank you all.